Welcome to Unscripted with Russo. For our podcast, we decided to explore the people behind the narratives. I'll introduce decision makers and influencers and find out the intimate story behind their rise to success. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Season 4 of Unscripted with Russo. I am being joined by Hanna, owner of Union and Finch, and he's here to tell us all about his life and how he became this amazing community member and restaurateur. So, Ed, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So we have to mention that your wife and partner, Shanaz, is not able to join us today, but we are going to make sure she's a part of this conversation because I know you guys are in this together.
Yeah, absolutely. She's actually at the restaurant. So that's how our life for our routine works right now. She's usually in the mornings or evenings, whatever it might be, depending on the day. And then we switch and we hand the kids off to each other.
I love it. It's amazing how you get it done, right? Like you just figure it out depending on what you need.
You do. Yeah.
So tell
absolutely.
me a little bit about yourself. I know you grew up in the Lehigh Valley and you grew up to Syrian parents, and I'd love to know a little bit more about that and the influence that it's had on your upbringing and being in contact with your culture.
Yeah, it's great way to start. So first generation Syrian. My parents immigrated to here, obviously when they were younger. Hospitality was a big part of our lives, really. I mean, hospitality is huge, not only in the Middle East, but just in general overseas in the Mediterranean. So for us, having family over, having friends over constantly was a thing for us growing up, and always entertaining. We didn't come from money, so we always wanted to make sure that people felt at home when they walked into our home. Our house is your house has always been what we were brought up with.
Yeah, did you have one of those families where on different occasions and holidays and things, you would just have a group of people? You didn't even always know who was going to show up or who would be there, but you knew you'd be kind of sharing a meal and
Yeah,
hanging out.
absolutely. I mean, unannounced visits were common, very common, and so that's just kind of how it rolled when we grew up.
Yeah, I grew up sort of in a similar household, Italians, and just food was central and people was central, and it was an open door policy. And I think it's sort of, I attribute that a lot to my love of people, is because I sort of had this breeding ground
Sure.
of a kid to be able to be inquisitive to
Mhm.
strangers. So I always love that. Do you feel like there was a connection to that upbringing and what you're doing now?
I definitely think that's the case. I mean, I think when we first envisioned this business, and in this restaurant, the goal was really to make every person that walked into our doors feel at home. That was a huge part of the hospitality that we wanted to kind of accomplish when we opened our doors 5 years ago, actually. So, making people feel that they're coming into their own home was critical to the way we operate this business today.
And what kind of kid were you? What were you into? Were you studious? Were you musical? Were you into sports? What was kind of your thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wouldn't say music came later in my life. When I lived in New York, music was a big part of my life. Early on, sports, but I wasn't really active in terms of just playing organized sports. Loved basketball. I think it wasn't until I got to Penn State that I kind of turned things around and got a little bit more studious. But yeah, driven for sure. I think that early on, you kind of grow up in a culture and a community that's very close knit. And I think for us and for me in particular, once I had to go to Penn State and then New York City, I kind of out of my shell, so to speak. That was a big part of who I am today, really.
Yeah, you mentioned having a big family, having family around, having a community around you. And I always remember my husband saying that community sense, like knowing an aunt or an uncle or a cousin was kind of watching you, kept you doing the right thing and kept you kind of focused on goals and family and things like that. So I don't know, did that have an influence on you in a positive way?
There was always someone watching you. Our parents found out about something, whether it was indirect or direct. Often. So, having cousins and uncles and aunts watching, whether directly or just from the periphery, it kept us on the straight path for sure.
Well, I want to get a little bit into your career, your early career, meeting your wife, and kind of the progression of how you really took a different path to get to where you are now. But before I do that, I want to ask you about
Yeah.
Penn State. What was that decision, and what did you end up studying? I mean, did you always know that you wanted to go to college? Was that something that was a priority for you as a kid, or was it something that your family encouraged? And why that decision?
Yeah, it was the path that was set, albeit that didn't go to college, was get an education, and that was critical. So I think for us, my siblings and myself, getting an education, getting a diploma was critical to not only what my parents wanted, but in terms of what we needed and wanted for the future. That was important for sure. And going to Penn State, I think for me was I kind of followed in the footsteps of my brother, who's I'm the youngest, so my brother and my two brothers and my sister are the older than me, obviously. But my brother went to Penn State and just saw how beautiful of a campus it was. My sister visited Penn State. I remember going to her visit or her tour. She didn't pick Penn State; she went to Lehigh. But I just remember Penn State very vividly. And then when my brother went, I felt like, well, and it seems like an easy choice. Love the school, love the campus, everything about it. So, and went into business there. I went into management science, information. So it's basically IT is what I went into, and off I went from there. Really.
Before, we talk about your professional career, which we'll do after the break. What was your first job? Like, what did you have jobs in high school, middle school? Like, what were some of your first jobs? Do you have any
Yeah.
lessons learned from those?
Yeah, absolutely. First job, Swenson. I was 13 years old. I wanted to make my own money. I remember telling my dad that, and he said, "All right, go find a job." So I went to Swenson's and became a busser and dishwasher. I think to an extent, if I remember, I'd help with dishwashing, but mainly a bus. I lasted 3 days, literally 3 days. I didn't make it that long, and I was okay. I'll take a break from this, but not too long after that, I went to Haagen-Dazs ice cream and worked as as an ice cream scooper at Haagen-Dazs in the mall. So
I love it. Oh my gosh. Well, that's a way to change 80 pounds to a little bit more, work in an ice
oh
cream shop
yeah,
and have all the free ice
uh,
cream you want, right?
yeah. A little more relaxed for sure, and not as intense as well. It's carrying a ton of dishes in the glassware around the restaurant.
I love it. That's great. Well, all those jobs interacting with people, I think probably taught you a lot about the
It
world out there.
it did. It did. I'll say that certainly growing up, I was more on the reserved and shy side. And as I got into kind of the latter part of my early adult life, that's kind of when I broke out of my shell for sure. But that kind of set me up for some of the things for sure.
Great. Well, all right, Ed, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about your experience in the music industry and New York City for over 15 years, and then how you made that transition to a restaurateur. So stick with us. This is Unscripted with Russo.
Time to take your workout outdoors. Discover Lehigh Valley is a great resource for finding easily accessible nature trails with stunning views and challenging terrain. Whether you're exploring the Delaware and Lehigh Trail or going for a jog on the Ironton Rail Trail, explore Discover Lehigh Valley to get you started. Follow them on Instagram, Lehigh Valley, PA.
Welcome back, everybody. I am being joined today by Ed Hanna, the owner of Union and Finch in Allentown. Amazing place, amazing restaurant. If you have not been, everybody raves about it all the time. Our crew has had some great meals there. So we're so excited to have you here, Ed. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
So we talked a little bit about growing up in the Lehigh Valley, going to Penn State, your first job, busing didn't really work out for you, but ice cream scooping did. And you ended up going to school for business and IT. And then you ended up getting a job in New York City. So tell me a little bit about that transition. How did you know what you wanted to do? Was that your first job? And how'd you get into that field?
Penn State graduated in 96, but in 95, the summer of 95, I should say, going into my senior year, I had a couple of opportunities in terms of internships. One is at Air Products, and the other was at Price Waterhouse in New York City. And you know, Air Products would have been the easy choice, local, close. Price Waterhouse in New York City would have certainly been a bigger choice in terms of just venturing out a little bit more. And I remember asking my dad about that. Again, my dad didn't have the luxury that I had or my siblings had in terms of going to school. And when I asked my dad what he thought, he said, you need to make the decision or the best decision, what's best for your future, really. So if you feel going to New York is going to give you more opportunities, then that's what you should do. So, yeah, I went to New York City, summer of 95. Again, I was just wrapping up my junior year, going to my senior. I remember going to New York for the first time in Center City, really, into the Port Authority. getting out and just looking at the buildings, 20-year-old me, and just was in awe. And it was in the dead of winter, but just was so overwhelmed and amazed by, everything that you see on in Hollywood or on movies. And it was exactly what you thought it would be. And I was an intern for the summer of '95 at Price Waterhouse. And shortly after my internship, they offered me a full-time job. And '96, I graduated and went right back into working in the city. But I didn't live in the city immediately. I lived with my sister in Central Jersey because living in New York was not the most cost-effective thing to do coming out of college. So lived with my sister for about a year, and brother-in-law, and saved some money. But then they got on a plane to move to Tokyo, so I had no other choice other than to move and to
We
spend,
were ships passing, Ed,
gosh,
'cause
15 years there.
yeah,
Yeah,
we were ships because I was in the city at that exact same time in college and interning. And I remember having a very
nice.
similar feeling. I mean, I grew up in Jersey, so I was in the city a decent amount as a kid, but there was nothing like that first time where you step foot and you're like, this is where I'm going to be every day.
In awe.
Just in awe. It's just amazing. And
Yeah, in
yeah,
awe.
yeah. And so how influential do you feel like those early years in that job at Price Waterhouse, which is pretty, I don't want to say notorious because it's such an amazing place, but it's a grind. Like those early jobs are pretty challenging in Manhattan.
Yeah, my first big project was for Sony Music and a consultant at Sony Music. And that was really, really intense. Late days, a lot of late nights. So, I'd work, take a car service home to New Jersey to my sister's house, pretty much 3, maybe sometimes 4 nights a week. Easy 12-hour days, then get up at 5:30 in the morning and get back on New Jersey Transit to go back into the city. So learned a lot about just working hard and whatnot. Just long days, and really set me up for the future.
It's interesting because I think a lot of times people will speak to someone who maybe has found success in their 40s and 50s and think that that's where it always was, but they forget those early days. And I always say to my kids, like, doesn't matter what you do, you have to pay your dues. You have to work hard. You have to learn the ropes and be low man on the totem pole to get working your way up. And it's amazing what that teaches you later on, and I mean, you're in the restaurant business now. Those are the longest days around,
Mhm.
right? So
I think you're 100% right. Those early days set me up for where I'm at today, for sure. I mean, those long days at Price Waterhouse were intense. And when you have deadlines and you're a consultant on a project for a major company like Sony Music, those deadlines, can't miss them. You just can't miss them. And there's a lot of pressure. They're challenging days for sure. And you travel as well quite a bit in consulting, although I was fortunate enough not to have to travel a lot because, living in New York City and paying the rent that you pay, yeah, you want to spend most of your time in the city. So I was
yeah,
fortunate and blessed not
exactly.
to have to travel a ton.
And tell me a little bit about that work in the music industry for people who may not be familiar. It's certainly, like you said, it's a pressure cooker, but it is
Yeah,
exciting. Were there any stories or, exciting things that you got to participate in that just showed you a different side of the business?
it did. Yeah, I mean, I think early on, like I said, I was a consultant for Sony Music, and then I got hired by Warner Music, actually, so one of Sony's competitors, and I went full time after I decided, all right, kind of done my rounds in consulting, 4 or 5 years was enough. Earned my stripes. I got an offer from Warner Music to go work for them, and that's where I spent the better part of my career in New York, actually. So I worked with Warner from, I would say, just about 11 years. It's probably around 2003 I went to Warner Music Group and gradually worked my way up there. Really, I was in IT, and then I worked my way up to a pretty senior position overseeing a global group that built and managed e-commerce and marketing websites for artists like Tom Petty, David Bowie, Pink Floyd. So it was fun. It was intense again because you're kind of at the beck end of an artist manager who wants a web store up tomorrow, or a marketing promotion for a tour up yesterday. It's just it was good, but it was intense for sure.
And really at such an interesting time, because really that's when e-commerce was just exploding and coming alive. And we were really first learning about that as a medium, really.
Yeah, you're 100% right. That was really when e-commerce was taking off, and people were streaming music, and merchandising was becoming a big part of the music industry as well as touring. So I was certainly kind of in that transition, which was exciting and really cool. It was certainly the best years of my professional life and personal life for many reasons as well.
So now, Ed, how did you meet your wife? As I think you guys met in the city, is that correct?
We did. A mutual friend introduced us. Shanaz, she came to this country when she was 10 years old in 1980. Family of 9 kids, living in a fairly small house right above the Bronx in Yonkers. Yeah, her story is far more interesting than mine in terms of their journey coming to this country. I met her through a mutual friend in 2006, actually. We were introduced and hit it off, and off we went.
That's awesome. That's amazing. So tell me a little bit about how you ended up back in the Lehigh Valley. What sort of happened that started to ignite the concept in you that maybe this was where you were going to make home?
Y- Yeah, so Shanaz and I, like I said, met in 2006, got married in 2007, and spent some time in New York at first because I just figured, let's enjoy traveling. Let's not worry about the kids right away. Both were kind of like, let's go abroad. We're not going to have this opportunity a whole lot, so we went overseas quite a bit to just visit places like Italy. Went to London. Just traveled and enjoyed that for a little bit. Then we had from 2007 to about 2010, 3 years, we kind of lived that single without kids, I should say, or married without kids life. And then had my daughter, my oldest, in 2010. And at that point, we started to think about, all right, living in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, um, is it cost effective, to stay here, trying to, start a family, grow a family and whatnot. And 2011, she was actually expecting our second child, my son, and we decided to move back to Allentown at that point. So 2011, in May of 2011, we moved back to Allentown, Whitehall. That's where we live. I live in my childhood home that I inherited from my parents who are deceased. So live in my childhood home, and really kind of started our journey here. For me, I lived here, I grew up here. We felt that it was time to start the family and just kind of lay down our roots, so to speak. So I was still commuting back to New York though in 2011 when I moved back for 3 years, actually.
Wow,
Actually,
you
four
commuted
years.
to Manhattan for 4 years?
I did, but 3 days a week wears on you. Getting on that bus, it was a 5:55 bus in the morning and a 5:55 bus at night. So it was a long day. And then with these buses having Wi-Fi, I was working straight through. I just couldn't sleep on a bus. So I'd work straight through. And I had set a window of 3 years in terms of just kind of continuing to do that. But it lasted 4 years. And then I actually found a job locally here, and did that at Cigars International. I got a director of IT or head of IT there job. So, and that worked out, in terms of the transition. But in the meantime, in parallel, we were trying to start the restaurant. So we had our hands full.
That's awesome. And I think it's interesting for people to know that, you were able to make a transition from city life to suburban life. What was that like for Shanez and for her family? Because you mentioned that huge family, and have any of
Yeah.
them ended up coming to the Lehigh Valley?
Yeah. Um, it was tougher for me than it was for her. She lived right above the Bronx, and again, she spent, when we got married, we spent 3 years, 4 years almost living in the city before we moved back. So I think for her, it was a little bit of a transition because she missed her family, large family again, close knit. For me, it was a little bit more difficult because I just love New York. Till this day, I miss it dearly. I mean, I go back every 6 weeks just to get my head space. People leave New York to get clear the head. I go to New York to kind of clear my head. So,
You're preaching
um,
to the choir on that one. I'm someone who, when I go into the city, and I don't go as often as that, although with kids transitioning to college, I'm hoping
yeah,
that's more in my future. And
yeah, I'll
I
tell you.
get there and I take the deep breath of the dirty city air, and I hear the noise and the sights, and I
100%.
literally feel my soul invigorated. And you can't explain to people who don't have it. So I get it completely. So how long was it that you were in the Lehigh Valley? You were commuting for 4 years. Where did the idea of opening a restaurant come from?
Always interested in the hospitality industry, wanted to do it in New York, but you're kind of a dime a dozen in New York, here today, gone tomorrow. So, it wasn't really realistic to think about it there, although that was, something that always, again, as I said earlier, growing up in a very close knit, hospitable family in terms of just, open doors to everyone. That was always something that I felt if I did, anything entrepreneurial, it would be a restaurant. And that it kind of started in New York, it really did. And in 2010, as we started to contemplate moving back, my wife and I had wondered what was going on with the old JP O'Malley's. which was a very popular place for almost 15 years up until 2009. And I thought, I'm just going to take a drive by the building. And I drove by and I saw a for rent sign on the window. And that's kind of where the journey started, really, in terms of pursuing that particular piece of real estate.
So as you had this idea to start a restaurant, what from your career had you learned? What from your family, what from your time in New York, did you pour into the vision for Union and Finch? Tell me a little bit about that process.
Yeah, I think career-wise, having worked in kind of online marketing and e-commerce, that really set me up for what I think was going to be uh, critical to making this restaurant successful and being present. And when I say present, I mean being present online. I think, as you very well know through what you operate today, you can't get by without not having a presence online. I mean, that was huge. Building an online presence was critical to, I think, the success of our restaurant and getting through the first 2 to 3 years, which were very, very challenging. So that was very important.
Well, then it really helps to have an IT background, right?
It does. Yeah, yeah,
That's
absolutely.
often the challenge, right? People have a passion maybe for the food, but they don't know about that side. And I know from our business,
Totally.
we see a lot. People are so amazing in their particular industry that makes them start a particular business, but they may not have the expertise in the IT or the marketing or the video or whatever. And that's makes it challenging in today's world to get the word out.
That's so true. I think that was critical. I mean, I think making sure that, especially the last 18 months with the pandemic, really, I mean, if you weren't online, you weren't going to be doing well. That was a reality of this. I think in terms of just translating some other things into what we liked about the restaurant was, I mean, literally, so when I was commuting to New York after I moved back permanently here and commuting and staying overnight every Wednesday, uh, to kind of break up that commute. Every Wednesday, what I would do is I'd pick a different restaurant. I'd go with my notepad, have a drink, have some food at the bar, and just jot down ideas, whether it be food ideas, whether it be design ideas. A lot of what you see are ideas that my wife and I took from places that we loved in New York City. And that was integral to kind of the vision that we have, because none of us are interior designers, none of us are architects for that matter. And I think for us, it was just important to kind of go to some of our favorite places and just try to cherry pick some of the ideas that we love there.
There are two things about that I think are really important to note. And the first is just to say that, again, these things don't happen overnight. I think people often think they do, but you're talking about years of really thinking and being methodical and paying attention. You're talking about bringing a notebook and checking out restaurants in the city. And I just like to point that out because the idea of really being passionate about something, but also doing your due diligence, I think is so important for success. And you didn't really cut any corners, you kind of took the long, detailed road. And do you feel like that's paid off for you now that you've been in business for a while? And you mentioned the pandemic and having that strong online presence. How did that help you throughout all this?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, having that early due diligence and just the vision that we all collectively had was super critical. I mean, to this day, I still have the notes that I took from those visits to those restaurants, the bookmarks, all the things that we liked in terms of interior and design. That was super important because I think that helped us build a vibe and an atmosphere that was important, really, to kind of continue to make this business successful, or make this business successful, I should say. So, because when we hear people talk about our restaurant, some of the things that say the food is really good, obviously, and we're grateful for that. We have a great staff in the kitchen. But also, I think some of the things that we hear is you walk in, you feel like you're transformed to somewhere else. And it doesn't feel like you're in Allentown. It feels like you might be in Brooklyn or Fishtown in Philly, for that matter. That was special to hear that, because that's what we wanted to do, is make people feel like, wow, this is cute. You hear that a lot. I stay at the door quite a bit with our hosts or hostesses, and I hear that a lot. That was super important. And then the last year and a half plus, just yeah, if this had happened, this pandemic 3 years ago, we would have never made it. I've said that many a times the last 18 plus months, because we're still young. We were tucked away in a neighborhood, albeit this restaurant was something before us, had a long-standing history, popular history. We were just not set up to kind of endure this pandemic. We would have never made it. So having kind of gotten through the first 2 to 3 years was critical, obviously, to kind of get through the last 18 months. We were able to build a community support, and that was important. And I think being online and being present separating ourselves from a lot of others was early on was critical to the business too, because one of the things that we wanted to do is make sure our employees were taken care of. And that was huge because I remember when we were in, I guess it would have been at this point, March of 2020, end of February probably.
Mhm.
And we kind of started to get a sense that something was going to happen soon, meaning that we knew that they were going to shut down. And we initially thought, okay, 2 to 3 weeks, no big deal. 6 months later, we were still shut down. So yeah, again, to your point, online was huge. Being present was huge because I think that helped us carry us through this pandemic for sure, and the love of our community.
Well, I want to take a quick break, but when we get back, you talked about the community and how good you've been to them and how good they've been to you. I'd love to learn a little bit more about what you and Shanez love about the Lehigh Valley. So stick with us. You're listening to Unscripted. We'll be right back.
Ever wonder what you get when you combine an historical riverside city, high-end dining, entertainment venues, and craft distilleries? The city of Easton, of course. One of my favorite spots is the Easton Public Market, right in the center of it all. But there's a variety of places to choose. Whether you're looking for a park to unwind or a night out with friends, check out Discover Lehigh Valley's website to find all the hot spots in Easton. Visit their website at discoverlehighvalley.com for more information.
All right, welcome back to Unscripted. I'm here with Ed Hanna, the owner of Union and Finch. Ed, we've had a great conversation talking about your growing up in the Lehigh Valley, going to New York, falling in love with New York, having an entire career in IT and the music industry, and then ending up back here in the Lehigh Valley to raise your family and having sort of this beautiful vision, crazy idea of opening a restaurant. And so here you are, surviving a pandemic, running a restaurant with your wife. How do you guys balance it all? How do you balance having a family, having a restaurant, which are long, long, long hours, and really managing that as a couple and as a family?
We're still trying to figure that out. It's tough. Like 3 kids, young, 11 and younger. Not having them all in school last year in person was difficult. It was obviously the right thing to do, but that was a challenge. Mondays are our only day off. Monday's the only day that Shanaz and I see each other and spend time with each other. We are very hands-on. We manage the restaurant. We help in the kitchen because, like everyone else, we're short-handed. We're short-staffed right now, and there was a stretch for 2 to 3 months. The last, I guess, maybe 3 months ago or so, I was washing dishes. Shanaz was doing stuff in the kitchen. We're still are. I mean, Saturday and Sunday brunches, I'm in the kitchen helping out because we just don't have the staff to, and we don't want to burn people out. So in terms of kind of that work-life balance, it's been a challenge the last 18 months. There's no doubt about it. I mean, Shanaz just had 2 nephews and a niece get married. I wasn't at any of those weddings, so that I just couldn't afford to leave because we don't have the support yet in terms of a full staff. It's tough. I think we kind of pick and choose. We just went on a little bit of a short trip to the shore last week. That was really helpful. We shut the restaurant down for a couple of days. So we were
I've been
able to
seeing
relax.
that more and more, Ed. I've been seeing, I know several family restaurants. My daughter actually works for one over in Hellertown, and they just closed down for a week. They're like, the easiest thing is to give the entire staff and our family the week off all at the same time. Our customers know it. They get to count on it. They support the concept. So I think that's really cool. It seems to kind of be a little bit of a trend.
I do too. I think there's some trends like that you just mentioned that are starting to come about that I think are going to change this industry for the better. I mean, the restaurant that used to operate 7 days a week until 2 a.m, I don't think you're going to see that a whole lot anymore. I just think that people are going to realize that work-life balance equally is important, especially when you go through what we did the last 18 plus months. So I think shorter hours, not as many days during the week in terms of operation are going to be a new trend, and giving your employees, giving yourself a break is going to be critical.
So tell me about the name. What does Union and Finch mean? Where does it come from?
Yeah, so a lot of people think Union and Finch must be the cross streets. It is not. Union is. We picked Finch. We were going to do, so it's on the corner of Union and Fulton. We were going to call it the Fulton Union, but we need something that can kind of lend to a logo and a brand. So in the 20s, when there was no Allen High School, there was no Deerup High School, they picked a bird as their mascot, and it was a canary. But canary would have been too obvious, and a canary is a finch. So we figured Union and Finch. But the name itself, Union, the Canary itself, we felt represented unity with the resurgence downtown, the revitalization downtown, with everything going on there, even with the waterfront, what's potentially hopefully going to happen soon there. There's a lot of activity in the city, good stuff going on. There's a resurgence. We felt that the two words together meant coming together as family and friends and enjoying and having a good time. So
I love it. I think it's so original. And like you said, it's kind of got this vibe where it is paying homage to our community, but it also has
yeah,
a very metropolitan city feel to it. And Allentown is undergoing such a resurgence. So it's really neat to hear how those things collided just with the name. There's so
yeah,
much to a name, right?
there is. We needed something that rolled off the no.
What else do you guys love? You mentioned you have limited free time, but you do have kids. What do you love about the Lehigh Valley? I mean, why is this a place that you're making your home?
I think it's great because you're seeing a lot of folks finding the Lehigh Valley, probably more so than when I was growing up. I mean, you're 90 miles away from New York City, 60 miles away from Philadelphia. Not that everyone goes to those two places, but knowing that you have that accessibility to two major cities is huge. There's also a lot going on around here. I mean, I think it's far different than when I grew up, like I said, in terms of not only the hospitality scene, but also what's available to do with kids. I think there's a lot of people, especially being in Allentown and in Bethlehem too, for that matter, that care passionately about these two cities. And we're in Allentown, obviously I'm going to speak to that, but there are a lot of people that are genuinely passionate about Allentown and want to see it kind of return to a vibrant kind of downtown and surrounding areas that it was, 20 years ago when I grew up. And I think with time we'll get there. I really do. And I think that seeing that there's people that are kind of the same mindset is really special.
You guys have been such a big part of that. But if you're not eating at your own restaurant, where are some other places you like to go? As someone in the business, where do you go when you're not eating your own food?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna, I'll pick some places that are just close by, but also just some, breweries. We don't get out a lot. So if I'm going to Bethlehem to have a beer, I'm just going to go to Bomb Place. I really like what Sam and Bomb Place are doing over there in Bethlehem on the south side. I think the south side of Bethlehem is really special. Allentown and the surrounding areas, the Shelby. I like the Shelby. Donnie's a great guy, and he's really supportive of our business and other businesses. McCall Brewing for beers, Hijinks, Brew Daddy guys are fantastic downtown. There's just a lot going on in this area that I think if we get out, we try to kind of, go to those spots. My wife and I got out for lunch together on a Monday not long ago. We went to the old Oyster House. It's
A classic.
so that
A
was
classic.
yeah. So
That's what's nice.
yeah,
There's this
that's great.
blend of sort of classic places and new places. And you mentioned Donnie, who's a good friend of my husband and I. And I have to tell you, we watched him go through the process you described. When we would go on trips or to New York or to Philly, he would take photos and notes of everything. And I'll never forget going into Hamilton for the first time and then Shelby for the first time and seeing stuff that I know 10 years ago he was locking away that he wanted to bring to
Yeah,
Allentown.
that's what it's about, and that's special to see people do that and actually see their. I've been reflecting quite a bit more recently because we built this outdoor space, which was critical to survive the pandemic, and it came out nice. We were happy with the way it came out, but as I step back and think about where we've come in the last 5 years, because this is our 5-year anniversary, it's overwhelming to think how far we've come. It's special. It's special, and there's been a lot of people, current staff, former staff, that have been a part of this journey, customers that have helped us get through the last 18 months and the last 5 years. It's overwhelming, right? We're proud, we're honored, we're fortunate in many ways. So,
And you've made such an incredible impact on our community. I remember when I started our business and my business that, someone said it takes 5 years. And I thought, no way, that's impossible. And I remember so distinctly the shift from year 5 to year 6. And it's so much what I can feel and hear you experiencing. And it's awesome. So I'm excited to see what the next 5 years brings for you and for your family. But before I let you go, I do want to ask you some of our rapid fire questions.
sure,
Are you okay with that?
absolutely.
All right. And you confirm you've never heard these questions.
I haven't.
Okay. What is one food you couldn't live without?
I had to go back to my heritage, tabbouleh.
Oh, that's such a good one.
Yeah,
What is your favorite hobby or activity, pastime to do?
visit New York City.
What
It's not a
actor?
hobby, but I love that. That's
That's
a
your
hobby.
favorite. It's a pastime. I like that one.
Yeah.
It's a unique answer too. All right. Which actor would you cast to play you in a movie about your life?
Yeah, he's married to someone of similar descent, George Clooney.
Nice. I can see it. If,
Yeah.
if you didn't have the job you have now, what would you be doing? And you can't pick something you've already done.
Um, I think I would definitely be involved that's community oriented, probably not for profit, because I just living now back here in the Valley and having a business in the city, giving back is so important. And I just want to be involved with our youth. Really, I think it would be something related to the youth for sure.
And name one person who inspires you.
Uh, Certainly my dad. My dad. You know, my dad came to this country at 15, 16 years old with nothing in his pockets and worked extremely hard to set us up for the future. And none of this would absolutely be possible without my mom and dad. So, you know, God rest their souls, both of them and my dad taking the chance on living the American dream really was special.
Well, on that note, Ed, we thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on 5 years with Union and Finch. All of you listening out there, if you haven't tried it, you are missing out. I can tell you it is a place where I have never, ever heard anything other than rave reviews from anyone who's ever been. And you're doing so much for our community. So congratulations and thanks for joining us on Unscripted.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for listening. Until next time.